Hey guys, welcome back. Okay, so a lot of you guys have actually requested me do a video on VG-10 versus VG Max. And for those who just want a quick answer, what is the difference between VG-10 and VG Max? From a performance standpoint and a practical standpoint, there are no differences. There are some percentage of an element, or maybe not even a whole percentage, but like 1/100th of a percentage or a 1,000th of a percentage difference in terms of a certain element that is different between VG-10 and VG Max. In all practical purposes, they function the same, they feel the same, they weigh the same, they are the exact same price. You know, VG Max didn't increase the knives. My first two Shuns, they were the Shun Classics, they were actually VG-10 steels. And then over the last couple of years, I've gotten samples from Shun, they're all saying VG Max. I did have a chance to actually use VG Max and VG-10 next to each other, side by side, and they felt exactly the same. They sharpened the same, they felt the same. There were really no obvious differences from a user's perspective. If you're looking to choose between VG-10 and VG Max, they're the exact same steels from all practical standpoints. Just buy the one that feels better in your hand. So if you were just looking for a really quick answer and you didn't want to watch a 5 or 10 minute video on explaining a much deeper aspect of the question, the video ends here for you. But for those who want to dive a little bit deeper into the topic, it's a much more interesting story than that. So as a disclaimer, I am not a metallurgy expert. I don't know a whole lot about steels and elements that go into steel making. I am not a knife maker. So this video is more about my personal experience with working with Shun knives and actually being able to meet the folks who make the VG-10 steel and the VG Max steels. So my information that I'm giving you is first person information. First off, VG-10. VG-10 has been really a household name, a staple in terms of Japanese cutlery. Everybody uses it. Everyone from your large manufacturers such as Shun, Miyabi, Yaxel, all the way down to your more or less your custom artisan knives, so your Masekages, even Tojiro's, which is a lower price Japanese manufactured knife, uses VG-10. And the biggest consumer of VG-10, at least in terms of manufacturing, is Shun. And in the US, Shun is definitely the biggest name when it comes to Japanese knives. I would say over 5 or maybe even 6 out of 10 Japanese knives sold are branded Shun. And worldwide, I don't really know what that number is. I'm assuming Shun is probably up there, definitely top 3. Now, obviously, there are many other big knife brands in Japan, but I'm only naming the ones that I know and have experience with. So I would say in the last 5 years or so, we've seen a very strong effort from the Chinese manufacturers to penetrate the Japanese knife market. And so you have brands, I'm not going to name any brands specifically in this video because I don't want any sort of libel lawsuit against me, but there has been a lot of effort from entrepreneurs that would go to China and would have knives made for them using Japanese steels. And so if you go to places like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, you'll find literally at this point probably hundreds of different brands that are started by entrepreneurs that are made in China, mostly by the same manufacturer. And so they all have that VG-10 logo or that VG-10 name next to their name. And that was like for the last 5 years, VG-10 became even more popular than it was when it was only being used by Japanese knives or Japanese knife manufacturers. VG-10 became a household name in the US. And so that's kind of partly thanks to the folks in the Chinese knife manufacturing business. Consumers were no longer able to tell the differences between a Japanese-made VG-10 and a Chinese-made VG-10. And then further adding into the confusion, Chinese knife manufacturers stopped putting made in China on their boxes and on their knives. That really made things extremely confusing for consumers and also frustrating for the manufacturers in Japan who used VG-10. Most chef knives with VG-10 will cost in the 110, 120, up to about 150, and then some even higher. Your Masekages, for example, will cost a little bit more than that. So with that price point, you can guess who are most affected by the influx of Chinese-made knives using VG-10. Shun. Shun by far is the most affected financially and also market share. And the VG-10 battle really happens in a couple of different fronts. So the first front is just the sheer number of manufacturers putting out actual VG-10 knives. And this next point is the most damaging to VG-10. Is not that there are Chinese manufacturers actually using authentic VG-10 steel making knives with them, but it's actually manufacturers using steels other than VG-10 and selling them as VG-10 knives and then degrading the VG-10 name. That's what's been happening in China. So again, I can't name any manufacturers in this video, but there has been lots of manufacturers in China that were actually using the license of VG-10 and just slapping it on their blades saying that they're made with VG-10 when in fact they were not. At this point, nothing could have been done. There was no stopping these other smaller brands from coming out with knives saying they were made with VG-10 steel. A brand like Miyabi, for example, started using more of their steel called FC61, which is a Miyabi proprietary steel. No one really knows where it's from. My guess is that it's actually a German steel or something of that sort, because you only see it on Zwilling knives and Miyabis. And for those who don't know, Miyabi is owned by Zwilling. And since they were bought out by Zwilling, you started seeing the FC61 steel, or that name, used on more Miyabis and Zwilling knives. So my guess is that the FC61 steel is actually German. Again, that's not confirmed anywhere. I can't find that information anywhere based on my research, and even speaking to people who are in the industry, actually no one really knows. So again, that's only a guess on my part. And then brands like Miyabi and Yaxol started pushing more towards SG2 steel, which is, I think, the next evolution in terms of knife steel in Japan at least. So the problem definitely affects the larger manufacturers the most, but it doesn't seem to affect the smaller manufacturers though. So brands like Masakage and a host of other really high quality artisan made knives, they're still making knives with VG-10. One, because it's a great steel, but two, because people who are buying knives that cost over $150 or $200 or even higher than that, they don't really care what the lower end knife makers are using. They know that their favorite manufacturers, Masakage in this example, uses VG-10, so they trust that brand, they trust that name and the knife maker. And most of the time when you're buying a knife from someone like Masakage, you're not buying the VG-10, you're buying the Masakage, which happens to be made with VG-10. So that's why I say knife manufacturers in the higher tier price points don't really have anything to worry about with VG-10 being saturated in the market at this point. So what is actually happening, or what did happen a few years ago? So based on some insider information, Shun and a few other large manufacturers sat down at the round table and basically said to Takaful Steel Company, said, we would like you to stop selling steel, or VG-10 steel specifically, to non-Japanese manufacturers, specifically those in China. For those with a very keen eye and an attention to detail, in the beginning of 2018, you notice that a number of brands, very high selling and popular brands on Amazon, were actually starting to change their knives from VG-10 to AUS-10. Now, AUS-10 is a decent steel. It's very close in overall performance to VG-10. A lot of folks were actually even commenting on my channel that, hey, this brand is now using AUS-10. What do you know about it? And at that time, because there was so much change happening at the same time, I really couldn't speak on the topic. I had the opportunity to sit down with the president and chairman of Takaful Steel Company, Michiro Kono, and the chairman. They're both Kono-sans. Kono-san Sr., and then Kono-san himself, the current president of Takaful Steel Company. It was a casual dinner, but it was at a very nice restaurant. If you guys want to see that video, let me know in the comments, and I'll post maybe a vlog video of all the clips from that day. Now, we spent about 3 to 4 hours together, from touring the factories to sharing a meal together. I had a chance to ask a lot of questions, but there were 2 questions that really was important to me. Was 1, what is the difference between VG Max and VG-10? And then 2, is VG-10 still being sold outside of Japan? I straight up asked Kono-san, what is the difference between VG-10 and VG Max? And I quote him, he says, there is a very little difference between them. And then I asked him, what exactly is the difference? He says, it's a trade secret. He is not lying to me, he's just protecting a client. And I fully understand that, but he was being honest that there is very little differences between the 2 steels, but he says there is a difference, though he cannot disclose what that is. Going into the conversation, I knew that was going to be the answer, that he can't disclose what exactly the difference is. So the other important question that I had was, is VG-10 still being sold outside of Japan? And the answer was yes. Now, for those who are curious, yes, I did attempt to ask who those manufacturers are, but I was not given an answer. So from that, we can derive a few different things. First, these people outside of Japan are buying volume big enough to actually support or help support the company. And 2, even with all the manufacturers in Japan, Shun, Miyabi, Yaxel, plus the artisan knife makers, they are not able to buy enough VG-10 to keep VG-10 from being sold outside of Japan. So even though the embargo was relatively successful, the damage has still been done. The VG-10 name has very much been diluted. There are still brands being sold today on Amazon and on Alibaba, obviously, using VG-10, or at least they're claiming to. And I can't really say if they're fake or real because I have no idea how to test for such, authenticity. People around the world have no idea when they're buying a VG-10 knife if they're buying one that's actually made in China or actually made in Japan. The confusion is actually still there, and that's why VG Max became something that was so crucial for a brand like Shun. So while some brands are moving away from VG-10, you are seeing Shun change the name of VG-10 to VG Max. They had to find a way to keep using VG-10 steel while differentiating their product line from the rest of the VG-10 products on the market. And for someone like Shun, who has probably purchased years of VG-10 stock and tens of millions of dollars in VG-10 knife making equipment, they had to find a more creative way to keep using VG-10. And so the easiest way and the cheapest way is changing their name of VG-10 to VG Max. Now, whether or not Shun will confirm or admit this, I don't think it really matters. It's their brand. They can put whatever they want on their knives as long as they have an agreement between the manufacturers of their steel to be using VG Max. They're all good. So you have brands like Miyabi moving away from VG-10 pretty much almost altogether. And then you have Yaxel, which only uses VG-10 on a couple line of their knives. If you're buying a Japanese-made knife that has the sticker made in Japan that says VG-10, you are buying a knife that is made with VG-10. So don't worry about that part. In my personal opinion, if you want to buy a VG-10 knife, I would recommend buying a knife that is made in Japan, that says made in Japan on the box and on the blade if possible. But if you're buying a knife that says VG-10 on the advertising and then you get the box and it doesn't say made in China or in Japan, just be careful with that. We're getting a lot of deceptive practices right now in the knife industry that Chinese knife manufacturers or brands that are made in China saying that they're using Japanese steels or using Japanese technologies and inspired by Japanese shapes, for example. But on the box, they don't say made in Japan and they don't say made in China. You don't really know where they're made, but because they have the word Kyoto there or the word samurai or whatever it is, you assume that they're made in Japan, but they're not. The words made in China may not be the most desirable when it comes to a knife, but it's at least honest. When I see a knife that says made in China, I know that they're made in China and that their person who is selling it is actually being honest about it. But when you see a box that doesn't say made in China, it doesn't say made anywhere, that to me is very deceptive and it's not worth my money at that point. And again, guys, I'm not proclaiming to be an expert or an authority of any sort. I have just had the opportunity to meet some very important people in the knife industry, especially the Japanese knife industry. And it was an honor for me to sit down with the folks over at Takufu. So thank you, Kono-san and Mr. Chairman, for sitting me down at lunch, not dinner, lunch, and allowing me the time to just pick your brains. So even though the saturation of Chinese-made VG-10 knives have kind of confused the knife market a little bit, I think it's still a very exciting time. And as long as you're an educated buyer, you're not going to be fooled by a brand selling a VG-10 knife that is half off, that is selling for 130 bucks, that should have been sold for 350 or 450. These videos to me are a lot of fun to make because I really enjoy being able to dissect a topic in depth in a single video. So if you guys want to see more videos like this and certain topics, let me know in the comments. Oh yes, I cannot forget knives. Oh, okay. So last week I announced I had about 100 knives to sell for $1 plus shipping. And these are roughly, some of them here that's already packed and ready. So I want to announce that these knives are going to my first 20 Patreon supporters of all time who are still active supporters today. Whether they were the $1 supporters or $20 supporters, it doesn't matter. You guys have never asked for anything in return, so I just want to say thank you. And so these knives are reserved for you. And then by next week, I'll have another 20 or 30 knives ready for another select group of my Patreon supporters. After that, I'll have another 40 or 50 knives that will be given to non-Patreon supporters, not giveaway, sell for $1 plus shipping. Just subscribers on my YouTube channel, chefs, and those who work or volunteer in a soup kitchen somewhere, you guys will be next. All right? Well, thank you guys for being here, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.